Hi, I'm Madison, 31 years old, and I thought I understood what family love looked like. Growing up, I believed that no matter what challenges you faced or achievements you earned, your family would be there to celebrate your victories and support you through your struggles. That's what families are supposed to do, right? Stand by each other, lift each other up, and create a safe space where you can be your authentic self. But sometimes life teaches you that the people you trust most, the ones who share your DNA and your childhood memories, can be the ones who inflict the deepest wounds. Last Christmas Eve, during what should have been a magical evening of celebration and joy, my grandmother said something that shattered every illusion I had about my place in our family. It was the moment that changed everything forever. Before I share what happened that snowy December evening, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family disappointment despite your success, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice in toxic family dynamics. Trust me, this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about unconditional love. To understand what happened that Christmas Eve, you need to know the complicated history between my family and me. Our relationship had always been strained, but it wasn't always this way. When I was little, before my mother Elena died of breast cancer when I was 14, things felt different. Mom had this way of softening the harsh edges of our family's perfectionist expectations. She celebrated my small victories, encouraged my dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and made our house feel like a home instead of a performance stage. But after we lost her, everything changed. Not just because we were drowning in grief, but because suddenly I became the primary reminder of everything my father had lost. Dad, Dr. Richard Williams, was a successful cardiologist who threw himself into work after Mom died. He worked longer hours, took on more cases, and seemed to find every excuse to avoid coming home to a house that felt empty without her laughter. I was raised primarily by my paternal grandmother, Vivian Williams, a woman who had been a high school principal for 30 years and believed that criticism was the highest form of love. Every grade that wasn't perfect, every social misstep, every normal teenage mistake became evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. She had this way of making her disappointment feel like a physical presence in the room. The comments started small, woven into everyday conversations. Remarks about how I needed to work harder if I wanted to live up to the Williams family standards. Observations that my mother would have been concerned about my lack of focus on finding a suitable husband. Questions about whether veterinary medicine was really prestigious enough for someone from our family. When I struggled with chemistry in high school, she'd sigh and mention how naturally intelligent my cousin Sloane was. When I spent weekends volunteering at the animal shelter instead of attending social events, she'd wonder aloud if I was developing the kind of social skills necessary for success in life. But I was determined to prove them wrong. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I earned a full scholarship to State University's pre-veterinary program, graduated summa cum laude, and was accepted to one of the most competitive veterinary schools in the country. I thought surely these achievements would shift their perception of me. Maybe then they'd see that their investment of criticism and tough love had paid off. But even those accomplishments were met with qualified praise. Dad mentioned how lucky I was to get scholarships since veterinary school was so expensive. Grandma Vivian commented that at least I was pursuing something practical, unlike some young women who wasted their education on frivolous careers. Veterinary school was my sanctuary for 4 years. I could focus on learning to heal animals, working with professors who valued my dedication, and building relationships with classmates who shared my passion. But when I graduated with honors and my Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree, Dad couldn't attend the ceremony because he had an important surgery scheduled. Grandma Vivian came but spent most of the reception comparing my achievement to my cousin Sloane's recent engagement to an investment banker. After graduation, I faced the same challenges most new veterinarians encounter. Building a practice takes time, establishing client relationships requires patience, and the business side of veterinary medicine is more complex than anyone prepares you for in school. I started as an associate at a small animal clinic, worked 60-hour weeks, and took emergency calls at all hours. Every time I visited home during those challenging early years, the family would make observations about how my expensive education didn't seem to be paying off very well yet, did it? But I kept pushing forward, driven by my love for animals and my determination to prove my worth. 3 years ago, everything finally came together. I was able to purchase the small animal clinic where I had been working when the owner decided to retire. Last year, I expanded the practice to include exotic animal medicine, a specialized field that requires additional certification and brings clients from 3 counties away. My practice now employs 4 other veterinarians, and we're booked solid for months in advance. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had built something meaningful and financially secure. That's when I made the decision to host Christmas Eve dinner at my newly purchased home. I had spent months renovating a beautiful Victorian house in the historic district, turning it into something that would make Architectural Digest proud. I wanted to show my family, especially Dad and Grandma Vivian, that I had not only made it professionally but had created the kind of life that reflected our family's values of success and achievement. I thought maybe, finally, they would see me as someone to be proud of rather than someone to be fixed. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters who would be joining us that Christmas Eve, because understanding these family dynamics is crucial to what happened later. My father, Dr. Richard Williams, had remarried 3 years earlier to Constance, a 45-year-old former pharmaceutical sales representative who had a master's degree in psychology and an uncanny ability to use that knowledge to manipulate every conversation. Constance brought 2 children from her previous marriage into our family, Blake, 22, who was finishing college with no clear career direction, and Harper, 19, who was majoring in communications and seemed to specialize in eye-rolling whenever I spoke. Then there was my father's older brother, Dr. Alexander Williams, an orthopedic surgeon who had always competed with Dad and now used family gatherings as opportunities to showcase his superior achievements. His wife, Penelope, was a former debutante who had built a successful interior design business catering to wealthy clients. She had perfected the art of delivering compliments that somehow made you feel worse about yourself afterward. Their son Bryce, my 29-year-old cousin, was a struggling real estate agent who still lived in his parents' guest house and had a gambling addiction that I was the only family member who knew about. I had quietly helped him pay off debts twice in the past 2 years, contributing over $12,000 to keep him from losing his car and damaging his credit. But somehow, in the twisted logic of our family, Bryce was still treated with more respect than I ever received. His failures were explained away as him being too creative for traditional sales approaches or needing time to find his niche in a competitive market. The golden child of our generation was Sloane, Alexander, and Penelope's 26-year-old daughter, who had built a successful Instagram presence with over 100,000 followers and had recently married Trevor, an investment banker who came from the right kind of family. Sloane was everything our family valued: conventionally beautiful, socially successful, married young to an appropriate man, and planning to have children soon. In everyone's eyes, she was the perfect example of how a Williams family woman should live her life. My grandmother Vivian, now 78 years old, remained the family matriarch whose approval everyone sought and whose criticism everyone feared. She had strong opinions about proper behavior, traditional gender roles, and the importance of maintaining family reputation. She had never quite forgiven me for choosing career over marriage, for living alone instead of finding a husband, and for working with animals instead of pursuing something more traditionally feminine. The week before Christmas, I called Dad to finalize the menu and make sure everyone could accommodate any dietary restrictions. During that conversation, he made several comments that should have warned me what was coming. He questioned whether my house was really big enough for the whole family, suggested that maybe we should have gone with Alexander and Penelope's house since they had more experience with formal entertaining, and wondered aloud if I was trying to prove something by insisting on hosting. But I dismissed these concerns. I was excited to finally have the perfect setting to share my success and, more importantly, to announce my engagement to Dr. James Rodriguez, the emergency veterinarian I had been dating for 2 years. James had grown up in a warm, supportive Latino family where achievements were celebrated and failures were met with encouragement to try again. He had witnessed some of my family's interactions before and had gently suggested that maybe my expectations were too high. But I convinced him that this time would be different. James couldn't quite understand why I was so anxious about proving myself to people who should have been proud of me regardless. His perspective was both comforting and heartbreaking because it showed me what healthy family relationships looked like. His parents had driven 6 hours to attend my veterinary school graduation when my own father had been too busy. His sister regularly called just to check on me and share good news about her own life. His family included me in their celebrations without making me feel like I had to earn my place at the table. The night before Christmas Eve, as I put the finishing touches on my house and prepared for the elaborate dinner I had planned, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety that I couldn't quite shake. I had spent nearly $3,000 on this evening, wanting everything to be perfect. The catering was from the most expensive restaurant in town, the wine was carefully selected by a sommelier friend, and every detail from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the professional floral arrangements was designed to impress. I had even hired a photographer to capture what I hoped would be a perfect family Christmas that I could look back on with pride. Christmas Eve morning arrived with fresh snow and the promise of what I hoped would be a new beginning for my family relationships. I woke up early to oversee the catering setup and make sure every detail was perfect. James arrived around noon to help with the final preparations, and I could see the concern in his eyes as he watched me frantically checking and rechecking every element. The house looked like something from a holiday magazine, with garland draped along the staircase, a 12-foot Christmas tree in the living room, and enough candles to create the warm, inviting atmosphere I had envisioned. The first family members to arrive were Alexander and Penelope, who entered my home with the kind of expression you might wear when touring a house you're considering purchasing. Alexander immediately began evaluating my renovations like he was conducting a property assessment, commenting on the crown molding and questioning whether I had really needed to replace all the original hardwood floors. Penelope's approach was more subtle but equally cutting. She complimented my decorating choices with phrases like, "How interesting that you chose such contemporary furniture for a Victorian house, and it must have been challenging to work with such small rooms." When Dad arrived with Constance and her children, the real performance began. Constance walked through my house like she was conducting an inspection, pointing out details to Blake and Harper as if she were providing commentary on my life choices. "Look at how much Madison spent on this kitchen renovation," she said, running her hand along the marble countertops. "Must be nice to have that kind of disposable income when you don't have children to think about." When Bryce complimented the beautiful Christmas tree I had decorated, Constance quickly redirected the conversation by talking about how Sloane always made her own ornaments, and how much more personal and meaningful that approach was. Blake, who had been drinking since he arrived, made himself comfortable on my expensive sofa with his shoes on the cushions. When I politely asked him to remove them, Constance jumped to his defense, saying I was being too precious about my furniture and that family should feel comfortable in each other's homes. Grandma Vivian arrived last, making her entrance with the kind of dramatic timing that reminded everyone she was the most important person in the room. She walked through my house with the critical eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating whether things met her standards. Every room prompted commentary about my choices, always delivered in the tone of someone providing helpful guidance to someone who clearly needed it. The early afternoon was filled with moments like these. Every effort I made to create a warm, welcoming environment was somehow turned into evidence of my character flaws. I was either trying too hard, spending too much money, or being too controlling about how things should be done. James watched these interactions with growing amazement, later telling me he had never seen a family work so systematically to diminish someone who was trying to do something nice for them. When we finally sat down for dinner in my formal dining room, I felt like I was performing in a play where everyone else knew the script except me, despite being in my own home. The meal was restaurant quality, the presentation was flawless, and the setting was elegant. But instead of acknowledging the effort and expense that had gone into the evening, the conversation quickly turned to comparisons with previous family gatherings. Grandma Vivian spent 10 minutes describing in detail how wonderful Sloane's intimate Christmas gathering had been the previous year, emphasizing how cozy and comfortable it felt compared to what she called my hotel-like approach. Alexander chimed in with stories about exclusive Christmas parties he and Penelope had attended, making it clear that while my dinner was adequate, it wasn't quite up to the standards of people who had truly made it in high society. As dinner progressed, the conversation inevitably turned to careers and life updates, which I should have anticipated but somehow still wasn't prepared for. Alexander began by discussing his latest surgical innovations and the research papers he was publishing in medical journals. He mentioned the new surgical wing being built at the hospital and casually dropped the names of famous patients he had treated, making sure everyone understood just how prestigious his practice had become. From there, the spotlight moved to Sloane's recent achievements, with Penelope leading the praise for her daughter's social media success. Sloane's influence marketing campaign for that luxury skincare line was featured in Forbes, she announced proudly. She's really pioneered this new approach to authentic advertising. Not everyone can build that kind of genuine connection with their audience. The implication hung in the air like incense. My work healing sick animals and running a successful veterinary practice apparently didn't generate the kind of authentic connection that mattered. Treating injured wildlife, performing complex surgeries, and providing emergency care that saved pets' lives didn't count as meaningful influence in their estimation. Alexander nodded approvingly and added his own commentary about the importance of building personal brands in today's economy. The thing about social media success is that it's scalable, he said. Sloane can impact thousands of people with a single post. That's true leverage, unlike traditional service businesses that can only help one client at a time. I tried to redirect the conversation by sharing news about my recent expansion into exotic animal medicine and the State Veterinary Association's recognition of my practice as the region's premier facility for specialized care. I explained how we were now treating everything from injured raptors to rescued primates, and how I had been invited to speak at the National Veterinary Conference about our innovative treatment protocols. Instead of celebrating these achievements, Dad's response was to minimize them completely. Well, it's easy to specialize when you don't have the overhead costs of a traditional medical practice, he said dismissively. Veterinary medicine doesn't have the same regulatory requirements or liability issues that real doctors face. Constance added her own perspective, suggesting that my career choice reflected a lack of ambition rather than specialized expertise. It's sweet that Madison enjoys working with animals, she said with that condescending smile she had perfected. But let's be honest, she chose veterinary medicine because it was easier than pursuing human medicine. Some people are just more comfortable with lower stakes. The conversation then shifted to family responsibilities and financial contributions, which was dangerous territory that I walked right into anyway. Alexander began talking about the importance of successful family members helping those who needed support. He mentioned the substantial down payment he had provided for Sloane and Trevor's house, making sure everyone understood his generosity. Penelope added stories about helping elderly relatives with medical expenses and contributing to various family emergencies over the years. Even Bryce, who had been mostly quiet during dinner, shared details about the financial advice Alexander had given him for his real estate career. Then Grandma Vivian delivered the setup that would lead to the devastating blow that was coming. It's interesting how family responsibility works, she said, looking directly at me across the table. Some people understand that success means lifting others up, and some people think success means showing off how much money they can spend on dinner parties. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, but I tried to respond calmly. I explained that I had actually been helping family members financially for years, just more quietly than others. I had been sending Grandma Vivian money for her medications and home maintenance for the past 3 years. I had covered Bryce's gambling debts twice without telling anyone else in the family. I had even paid for the flowers at Sloane's wedding when Dad had asked me to help with expenses, contributing $4,000 without any public acknowledgement. But instead of recognizing these contributions, the family seemed to close ranks against me. Bryce, who should have been the most grateful for my discretion about his gambling problem, started making comments about how people who live in expensive houses shouldn't lecture others about financial responsibility. Alexander questioned whether my contributions had really been as significant as I was claiming, as if I might be exaggerating my own generosity. The worst part was watching James's face as he witnessed this coordinated attack on someone he loved. He tried several times to redirect the conversation or acknowledge my achievements, but each attempt was quickly dismissed or ignored. I could see him struggling to understand how a family could systematically undermine one of their own, especially someone who had worked so hard to build something they should have been celebrating. The moment that changed everything came when I finally decided to share the news I had been saving for the perfect moment. We had moved to the living room for coffee and the elaborate dessert spread I had arranged, and I was hoping we could end the evening on a positive note. The atmosphere had been tense all day, but I still believed that sharing my engagement would shift the mood toward celebration and joy. I was sitting on the sofa next to James, holding the coffee cup that had belonged to my mother, when I finally found the courage to speak. "I have some wonderful news that I've been waiting to share with everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my nervousness. "James proposed 3 weeks ago, and we're engaged." I showed them my grandmother's engagement ring that James had beautifully reset with additional diamonds, creating something that honored our family history while representing our future together. I had expected warm congratulations, excited questions about wedding plans, and maybe even some genuine happiness for my personal milestone. Instead, the response was immediate and devastating. Dad's first reaction wasn't congratulations but concern about James's career prospects compared to traditional human medicine. "Emergency veterinary medicine is such a niche field," he said thoughtfully. "I hope you've both considered the long-term financial implications of 2 people in veterinary careers." Alexander nodded in agreement and added, "The thing about dual veterinary careers is the income ceiling. You'll both be competing for the same limited client base. It's not like when one spouse has a scalable business and the other provides steady income." Constance's contribution was even more cutting. "Madison, honey, successful marriages require balance," she said with false concern. "When both people are equally career-focused, someone's needs inevitably get overlooked. James seems lovely, but are you sure you're ready to prioritize someone else's happiness?" But it was Grandma Vivian's response that delivered the crushing blow I never saw coming. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision, looked directly at me with an expression of what she probably thought was loving wisdom, and spoke words that would echo in my mind for months afterward. "Madison, sweetheart, you've built yourself a nice little business, and this house is certainly impressive," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades shaping young minds. "But let's be honest about your situation. You've always been the one who takes more than she gives. James seems like a lovely young man, but marriage requires selflessness, and that's never been your strong suit. We all just want to make sure you don't become a burden to him the way you've been." She paused dramatically, letting her words sink in. "Well, the way things have been." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Even Blake, who had been making sarcastic comments all evening, seemed shocked by the bluntness of what she had just said. James's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips, and I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief to protective anger in the span of about 5 seconds. But it was the reaction of the other family members that really shattered my heart. Dad suddenly became very interested in his phone, scrolling through messages as if he hadn't heard what had just happened. Constance examined her manicure with intense concentration. Alexander cleared his throat and began discussing the weather forecast for the next day. Penelope started gathering her purse and coat, suggesting it was getting late. Even Sloane, who had been posting Instagram stories all evening, put down her phone and stared at her hands. In that moment of deafening silence, something inside me broke completely. But at the same time, something else was born. All those years of trying to prove myself worthy of love and acceptance, all those hours of wondering what I was doing wrong, all those moments of feeling like I wasn't quite good enough, suddenly it all made perfect sense. It wasn't about me at all. It was about them needing someone to be less than so they could feel better about themselves. I felt James reach for my hand, and his touch gave me the strength I needed to find my voice. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to speak my truth to this family, consequences be damned. What happened next surprised everyone in that room, including me. Instead of crumbling under the weight of Grandma Vivian's cruel words like I had done so many times before, I felt something shift inside me. All those years of swallowing insults, accepting criticism, and trying to earn love that should have been freely given had led to this moment of perfect clarity. I was done being their emotional punching bag. I stood up slowly, and my voice was completely steady when I spoke, which seemed to surprise them more than if I had started screaming. "You know what, Grandma Vivian?" I said, looking directly into her eyes. "You're absolutely right. I have been a burden to this family, but not in the way you think." The room became so quiet you could hear the snow falling outside the windows. I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. I've been a burden because I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it. I've been a burden because I kept believing that if I just achieved enough, contributed enough, sacrificed enough, maybe you'd finally see me as someone worth celebrating instead of someone to fix. Grandma Vivian opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand and kept going. Let me finish, because I'm going to say this once, and then we're going to have a very different kind of relationship going forward. I turned to address the entire room, making eye contact with each person as I spoke. Dad, you want to talk about financial responsibility and career prospects. I've been sending Grandma Vivian $800 every month for the past 3 years to help with her medications and house maintenance. That's nearly $30,000, in case anyone's keeping track. Dad's confident expression faltered, and I saw him glance uncertainly at Grandma Vivian, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and fury. Bryce, I continued, turning to my cousin, who suddenly looked very sober despite the wine he'd been consuming all evening. Remember when you couldn't make your car payments last winter because you lost that money in online poker? And again this spring when you owed your bookie $8,000? I covered all of that for you. That was over $12,000 total, and I never told anyone in this family about your gambling problem because I was trying to protect you. Bryce started to say something, but I wasn't finished. And Alexander, when you needed that short-term business loan 2 years ago because your surgical practice was having cash flow problems after that malpractice settlement, I gave you $25,000. You paid me back eventually, but you never mentioned it to anyone else, did you? Instead, you've spent tonight questioning whether my contributions to this family have been significant. The silence was becoming uncomfortable for them now, but I was just getting started. I had years of suppressed truth to share. Penelope, when you were starting your interior design business and needed capital for that first big commercial project, who do you think provided the $15,000 loan that got you started? And Sloan, those beautiful flowers at your wedding that everyone complimented. Dad asked me to help with expenses, so I paid the entire $4,000 bill without any acknowledgement because I wanted your day to be perfect. Now I turned back to Grandma Vivian, and my voice grew stronger with each word. And you want to call me selfish? You want to suggest that I take more than I give? I've been supporting this family financially while listening to all of you tell anyone who would listen how disappointed you are in me. I've been covering expenses and solving problems while you praise Bryce for his potential and Sloan for her social media success. Grandma Vivian finally found her voice. Madison, you're being dramatic and disrespectful. That's not how things. No, Grandma, I said firmly. That's exactly how things are. But here's what's going to change, starting right now. I'm done apologizing for my success. I'm done trying to make myself smaller so all of you can feel bigger. I'm done being grateful for scraps of approval from people who should be celebrating my achievements. James squeezed my hand tighter, and I could see the pride and love in his eyes. That gave me the courage to continue. I worked my way through veterinary school while Dad complained about how expensive my textbooks were. I built a successful practice while all of you dismissed it as playing with pets. I achieved financial independence while you predicted I would fail because I was too focused on my career. And through all of that, I kept trying to win your approval by giving you my time, my energy, and my money. Constance tried to interrupt with something about family harmony and holiday spirit, but I cut her off. Constance, you've spent this entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about my home, my choices, and my life. You want to talk about family harmony? Harmony doesn't require me to pretend your insults are compliments or accept your psychological manipulation as maternal concern. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted, and I could see them all struggling to adjust to this new version of me, the version that wouldn't accept mistreatment with a grateful smile. Dad, you missed my veterinary school graduation because you had surgery scheduled. You couldn't take 1 day off to celebrate your daughter earning her doctorate. But James's parents drove 6 hours to be there, and his sister threw me a celebration party. They understood what you couldn't, that someone you love achieving their dreams is something to celebrate, not minimize. What followed was the most honest conversation I had ever had with my family, though calling it a conversation might be generous since it was mostly me setting boundaries while they tried various strategies to restore the previous dynamic. Dad's first approach was to try to minimize what had happened, suggesting that I was overreacting to what he claimed was just typical family honesty. "We've always been direct with each other, Madison. That's how this family works. We don't sugarcoat things." "No, Dad," I replied calmly. "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty. Telling your daughter she's a burden in front of the entire family isn't honesty. It's emotional abuse, and I'm done pretending it's anything else." Alexander tried a different tactic, suggesting that families sometimes say things they don't mean when emotions run high. "We're all family here, Madison. Family forgives and moves forward. You don't want to hold grudges over one difficult evening." I looked at him steadily and said, "You're absolutely right, Uncle Alexander. Family should forgive and move forward. So I'm going to forgive all of you for years of treating me like I was somehow defective for achieving success on my own terms. But moving forward is going to look very different than moving backward." Sloane finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "Madison, I think maybe we all got a little carried away tonight. You know we care about you. This house is beautiful, and your practice is really impressive. Do you care about me, Sloane?" I asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. Because caring looks different than what I experienced tonight. Caring looks like celebrating someone's engagement instead of questioning their worthiness for marriage. Caring looks like defending your family member when they're being attacked, not posting Instagram stories while it happens. The room fell quiet again, and I could see them processing this new reality where I wouldn't accept mistreatment and call it love. James finally spoke, his voice controlled but with an edge of anger I rarely heard from him. "I've been sitting here all evening watching people who are supposed to love Madison systematically tear down everything she's accomplished. I've watched her try repeatedly to share good news and have it dismissed or turned into criticism. What I witnessed tonight wasn't a family dinner. It was bullying." Grandma Vivian turned on James with a flash of her old authority. "Young man, you don't understand our family dynamics. We've always held each other to high standards. We push each other because we care. There's a difference between high standards and cruelty," James replied steadily. "And what happened here tonight was cruelty disguised as concern. Madison has achieved everything any parent should be proud of, and instead of celebrating her success, you've all spent the evening explaining why it's not good enough." I felt a surge of gratitude for James's support, but I also knew this was my battle to fight. James is right, but this isn't his fight to fight. This is about me finally standing up for myself after 31 years of accepting unacceptable treatment. I took a deep breath and delivered the boundaries I had been formulating in my mind throughout this confrontation. "Here's how things are going to work going forward. I will no longer attend family gatherings where I'm expected to be a verbal punching bag for everyone else's insecurities. I will no longer provide financial support to family members who show me no respect or acknowledgement. I will no longer apologize for my success or try to hide my achievements to make others comfortable with their own choices." The protest started immediately. Bryce complained that I was being unfair and holding grudges over honest family feedback. Constance suggested I was letting pride interfere with family relationships. Alexander tried to convince me that I was making a mistake I would regret when I needed family support in the future. But Grandma Vivian's reaction was the most telling. Instead of apologizing or acknowledging the pain she had caused, she doubled down with the kind of manipulation she had perfected over decades of controlling family dynamics. "Fine, Madison. If that's how you want to be, then that's your choice. But don't come crying to us when that fancy life of yours falls apart and you need your real family." Her words confirmed everything I had suspected about her motivations. She wasn't just indifferent to my success, she was actively hoping for my failure because my achievements challenged the narrative she had built about me being the family problem. "I won't be coming to you if my life falls apart, Grandma," I said quietly. "But not because I'm proud or stubborn. Because I finally learned that real family builds you up when you're struggling instead of waiting hopefully for you to fall down so they can say they were right all along." The evening ended with an awkward and uncomfortable departure that felt more like an evacuation than a family goodbye. There were no hugs, No promises to call soon, no attempts to smooth things over with false pleasantries. They gathered their coats and purses with the kind of quiet efficiency people use when they're trying to escape an uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible. After they left, James and I sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of what I had hoped would be a perfect family Christmas. The expensive catering was barely touched, the carefully selected wine mostly undrunk, the elaborate dessert spread sitting abandoned in the dining room. But instead of feeling devastated by the waste and the conflict, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time in my adult life, I had refused to accept mistreatment and call it love. I had spoken my truth without apologizing for taking up space or demanding respect. The days and weeks that followed that Christmas Eve dinner were a mixture of relief, guilt, sadness, and ultimately profound personal growth. The immediate aftermath was exactly what you might expect from a family accustomed to controlling someone through emotional manipulation. My phone started ringing the next morning with various family members trying different approaches to restore the previous dynamic. Bryce called first, his voice slurred even though it was barely noon, demanding to know why I was acting like such an ungrateful bitch and threatening to tell everyone what a terrible person I was. I listened to his voicemail once and blocked his number. Constance's approach was more sophisticated but equally manipulative. She sent a long email about how disappointed she was in my outburst, how I had embarrassed the entire family, and how my poor father was just trying to prepare me for the realities of marriage. She suggested that I owed everyone an apology for my dramatic behavior and that mature adults know how to accept constructive criticism gracefully. Alexander tried the business approach, calling to lecture me about burning bridges and damaging important relationships. He reminded me that family connections could be valuable for professional advancement and suggested that I was being short-sighted in my reaction to what he called minor family feedback. Sloane's response was perhaps the most painful because it came closest to what I had hoped for but still fell short of real support. She called crying, saying she felt terrible about what had happened and that she wanted to fix things between us. But when I asked her directly whether she thought Grandma Vivian's comment about me being a burden was acceptable, she couldn't bring herself to say it was wrong. Instead, she kept trying to explain everyone's motivations and asking me to understand their perspectives. The most interesting response came from Dad himself. For the first week, he didn't contact me at all. Then I received a series of text messages that perfectly illustrated his mindset and the family's approach to conflict resolution. The first message blamed me for ruining Christmas and embarrassing him in front of his wife's children. The second message accused me of being ungrateful for everything the family had provided for me over the years. The third message threatened to cut me out of his will if I didn't apologize and return to being the daughter he expected me to be. What he didn't understand was that his threats no longer had power over me. I had spent so many years afraid of losing his approval that I never recognized how little approval he was actually giving me. The threat of withdrawal from someone who was already emotionally unavailable wasn't the devastating blow he expected it to be. I didn't respond to most of these contacts, which seemed to confuse everyone more than if I had engaged in ongoing drama and conflict. They had expected me to either apologize and return to the previous dynamic or to fight back with equal emotional manipulation. My choice to simply step back and focus on my own healing was apparently not a scenario they had considered. James was incredibly supportive during this transition, but I could see that witnessing my family's behavior had been eye-opening for him in ways that were difficult to process. He had grown up with parents who celebrated his achievements, siblings who supported his goals, and extended family who genuinely enjoyed spending time together. The idea that family members would systematically undermine each other was completely foreign to his experience. "I keep trying to understand their motivations," he told me one evening as we walked through the snow-covered park near my house. "But every explanation I come up with makes them look worse, not better. It's like they need you to fail so they can feel successful." That conversation helped me realize something crucial. I had spent so many years trying to understand and excuse their behavior that I had never simply accepted it at face value. They treated me poorly because they chose to treat me poorly. They minimized my achievements because it served some psychological need in them. They expected me to accept mistreatment because I had always accepted it before. The turning point in my healing process came when I decided to start therapy with Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a counselor who specialized in family systems and childhood emotional trauma. I had resisted therapy for years because I thought it meant admitting there was something fundamentally wrong with me. But I finally understood that therapy wasn't about fixing myself, it was about learning healthier ways to navigate relationships and protect my own well-being. Dr. Hernandez helped me understand patterns that had been invisible to me before. She explained how families sometimes designate one member as their identified problem or scapegoat, and how this role serves the psychological needs of other family members by giving them someone to blame for their own issues and insecurities. In your family system, she explained during one of our sessions, you became the repository for everyone else's fears about inadequacy. As long as you were the one who wasn't quite good enough, everyone else could feel secure in their own worth. Your success threatened that dynamic because it challenged their narrative about who you were supposed to be. Through our sessions, I began to recognize how much energy I had been spending trying to manage other people's emotions and reactions. I had been so focused on earning approval and avoiding conflict that I had never asked myself what I actually wanted from these relationships. The work was difficult and sometimes painful, but it was also liberating. I started to understand that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my family's opinion of me. I began to recognize my own achievements and celebrate my own successes without needing external validation from people who were incapable of providing it. About 6 weeks after Christmas, something remarkable happened at work. My practice manager mentioned that I seemed more confident and decisive in staff meetings. My veterinary technicians started asking for my opinion more often on complex cases. My surgical skills improved because I was no longer second-guessing every decision or apologizing for taking charge during emergencies. The changes in my professional life made me realize how much my family relationships had been affecting every other area of my life. When you grow up believing that you need to earn love through achievement, and that your achievements will never be good enough anyway, it creates a constant state of anxiety and self-doubt that follows you everywhere. As months passed, I began to understand what healthy relationships actually look like and started building those connections intentionally. The contrast with my family dynamics was stark and illuminating. My relationship with James deepened as he witnessed my journey toward emotional health and personal boundaries. He watched me transform from someone who apologized for taking up space to someone who could confidently express needs and expectations. Our conversations became more honest, our conflicts more productive, and our connection stronger. "You're different now," he told me one evening as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen. "Not different in your core personality, but different in how you move through the world. You seem more present, more yourself." He was right. I had spent so many years mentally preparing for criticism and rejection that I hadn't been fully present in positive experiences. Now I could enjoy achievements without waiting for someone to diminish them. I could accept compliments without immediately deflecting them. I could make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what I thought would avoid disapproval. At work, I started forming genuine friendships with colleagues instead of just maintaining professional relationships. When my surgical technician invited me to her housewarming party, I didn't spend 3 days analyzing whether she really wanted me there or was just being polite. When my practice partner asked for my input on expanding our exotic animal services, I shared my ideas confidently instead of qualifying every suggestion with apologies. Most surprisingly, I started developing closer relationships with friends I had known for years but had kept at a distance. I realized I had been so afraid of being a burden that I never allowed anyone to really know me or help me with anything. As I became more open about my struggles and more willing to both offer and accept support, these friendships flourished in ways I hadn't expected. My colleague Dr. Sarah Chen, who I had known since veterinary school but had never felt truly close to, became one of my strongest supporters during this transition. When I finally told her about what had happened with my family, her response was immediate and unequivocal. "Madison, I've been watching you apologize for your success for years," she said. "I've seen you downplay your achievements and worry constantly about whether people respect you. I always wondered where that came from. Now I understand, and I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself." Having friends who genuinely celebrated my successes and supported me through difficulties showed me what I had been missing in family relationships. These people didn't need me to be less successful for them to feel good about themselves. They didn't compete with me or try to diminish my achievements. They simply enjoyed my company and wanted good things for me. About 4 months after Christmas, I received an unexpected call from Sloane. Unlike her previous attempts at contact, this conversation felt different from the beginning. Her voice was subdued, and she asked if we could meet for coffee to talk privately. When we met the following weekend, she looked tired and uncertain in a way I had never seen before. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at Christmas," she began. "And I keep coming back to something you said that night. You said that caring looks like defending your family member when they're being attacked, not sitting silently while it happens." I waited for her to continue, not sure where this conversation was heading. "You were right," she said quietly. "I sat there and watched Grandma Vivian call you a burden, and I said nothing. I told myself I was staying out of it, but really I was being a coward. And I've been doing that for years." This admission opened up a conversation about family dynamics that we had never been able to have before. Sloane talked about her own struggles with the family's expectations and criticism, and how she had learned to avoid being the target by redirecting attention to me. She acknowledged that this strategy had protected her but had also made my experience worse. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand up to them the way you did," Sloane said honestly. "But I want you to know that I see what happened, and I'm sorry I didn't support you when you needed it." This conversation didn't immediately restore our relationship, but it was the beginning of a different kind of connection between us. For the first time, we talked honestly about our family instead of pretending everything was normal. Sloane also shared information that helped me understand some of Grandma Vivian's behavior. Apparently, in the weeks following Christmas, Grandma had been telling anyone who would listen that I had become too good for the family and was looking down on everyone because of my professional success. She was positioning herself as the victim of an ungrateful granddaughter rather than examining her own behavior. This information was both hurtful and liberating. It confirmed that Grandma Vivian was not going to take responsibility for her words or actions, which meant I could stop hoping for an apology or acknowledgement that would never come. But it also validated my decision to step away from the relationship because it showed that her behavior was deliberate rather than accidental. Around this same time, I started getting pressure from extended family members who hadn't been at Christmas but had heard Grandma Vivian's version of events. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly called to express concern about my attitude and to suggest that I should reconcile with the family for the sake of unity. These conversations were illuminating because they showed me how family systems work to maintain dysfunction. Rather than holding Grandma Vivian accountable for her hurtful behavior, everyone was focused on pressuring me to accept that behavior and return to my role as the family scapegoat. The priority was maintaining the appearance of family harmony rather than actually addressing the underlying problems. I learned to respond to these pressure tactics with simple, clear statements. I'm not willing to be in relationships where I'm consistently disrespected. If that changes, I'm open to conversation. Until then, I'm focusing on the relationships that are healthy and supportive. Most people didn't know how to respond to this approach because it didn't give them anything to argue with or try to fix. I wasn't attacking anyone or demanding that they choose sides. I was simply stating my boundaries and living according to them. This period of my life taught me that healing doesn't require other people to change their behavior or acknowledge their mistakes. Healing comes from accepting reality as it is and making choices that protect your own well-being. I couldn't make my family love me differently, but I could choose not to subject myself to treatment that was harmful to my mental and emotional health. By the time my next birthday rolled around in April, I felt like a completely different person than I had been at that disastrous Christmas Eve dinner. Instead of dreading the day and wondering if anyone would remember or care, I planned a celebration with people who genuinely wanted to be there. James organized a surprise party with my closest friends and colleagues. The evening was filled with laughter, genuine affection, and celebration of who I was rather than criticism of who I wasn't. As I looked around the room at people who had chosen to be part of my life, I realized that I had finally found my real family. The most powerful moment came when Dr. Sarah raised a toast that brought tears to my eyes, to Madison, who taught us all that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. That night, I didn't receive a call or text from Dad, Grandma Vivian, or anyone else from my biological family. For the first time in my life, that didn't hurt. Instead, it felt like confirmation that I had made the right choice in creating boundaries that protected my peace and well-being. The woman who had spent years trying to earn approval from people who were determined not to give it was gone. In her place was someone who understood that her worth wasn't up for debate, her achievements didn't need external validation, and her love didn't have to be earned through perfect behavior or endless sacrifice. About 6 months after that Christmas Eve confrontation, I received one final communication from my family. It was a wedding invitation, not for me, but from me. Dad had apparently learned about my engagement through social media and was hurt that he hadn't been formally invited to participate in wedding planning. The letter that accompanied the returned invitation was a masterclass in manipulation. He wrote about how much the family missed me, how they were willing to overlook my Christmas behavior if I would just come back and be part of the family again. He mentioned that Grandma Vivian's health was declining and that she would really benefit from seeing me succeed in marriage, as if my wedding was primarily about providing her with comfort. But the most telling part was his assumption that I would want them at my wedding despite everything that had happened. He had enclosed a list of family members who would need to be invited, along with their dietary preferences and seating requirements. He had completely missed the point that healthy relationships require mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. I showed the letter to James, and his response was swift and clear. The people who belong at our wedding are the people who have been celebrating us all along. Everyone else is just people we happen to share DNA with. We had a beautiful wedding 3 months later. It was smaller than originally planned but filled with people who genuinely loved and supported us. Dr. Sarah was my maid of honor, my practice colleagues were there cheering us on, and James's family embraced me with the kind of warmth I had always craved from my own relatives. My mentor from veterinary school, Dr. Elizabeth Foster, gave a speech that perfectly captured what I had learned about real family. The people who truly belong in your life will never ask you to be less than you are. They'll challenge you to grow, support you through struggles, and celebrate your victories as if they were their own. Those are the relationships worth building a life around. Looking back on that Christmas Eve evening, I can honestly say it was one of the most important things that ever happened to me. Not because the confrontation was pleasant or because I enjoyed hurting people I had once hoped to please, but because it forced me to finally choose myself over their comfort. It taught me that sometimes the most important word you can learn to say is no. No to mistreatment, no to manipulation, no to relationships that require you to be smaller than you are in order to make others feel bigger. The veterinary practice has continued to thrive, and we've now expanded to include a wildlife rehabilitation program that works with the state's Department of Natural Resources. I was recently elected to the board of the State Veterinary Association, and my research on exotic animal surgery has been published in several professional journals. None of these achievements required my family's approval to be meaningful or valid. Most importantly, I learned that real love doesn't ask you to apologize for your achievements or hide your light to make others feel better about themselves. Real love celebrates your growth, supports your dreams, and chooses your well-being over its own convenience. If someone in your life consistently fails that test, if they need you to be less successful for them to feel good about themselves, if they treat your achievements as problems to be managed rather than victories to be celebrated, then maybe it's time to ask yourself whether that relationship is serving your highest good. The people who truly belong in your life will never require you to earn their love through perfect behavior or constant sacrifice. They won't need you to fail in order for them to feel successful. They'll be genuinely happy when good things happen to you, and they'll support you through challenges without keeping score of what you owe them. Those are the relationships worth fighting for, worth investing in, worth building a life around. Everything else is just people who happen to share your last name or your childhood memories, but who don't actually know how to love you for who you are. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family peace and self-respect? Have you found the courage to walk away from relationships that consistently left you feeling smaller than when you started? Have you learned the difference between people who love you and people who just love what you can do for them? Drop a comment below and share your story. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find their own courage to set boundaries and demand the respect they deserve. If this story resonated with you, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about finding your voice, setting healthy boundaries, and building the life you actually want rather than the life others expect from you. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need the reminder that they deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by the people who claim to love them most. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. Remember, you are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are, with all your achievements and ambitions and dreams. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, be kind to yourself and choose relationships that choose you back. You deserve nothing less than people who celebrate your success instead of resenting it, who support your growth instead of trying to limit it, and who love you not despite your achievements but because of the amazing person those achievements reveal you to be.